Well, good morning, everyone, and certainly thanks, Stephen, for an amazing presentation. I've only got 5 minutes, so I'll keep it quick, but I think there's two key challenges that came out of Steve's talk, which we face on a daily basis. One is a cultural challenge. How do we effectively shift the mindset of both technical specialists, elected officials, and the community who currently think what they're doing is the only way to plan for the future? And then the other aspect is particularly the technical dimensions that Steve spoke on. So very quickly, two quick stories. As a firm, we were invited by Coffs Harbour City Council up to have a look at their town centre. If you know Coffs Harbour, it's up on the mid-north coast, and at the moment Coffs it's losing a battle against Port Macquarie. Port Macquarie's invested in new cultural infrastructure and their public domain, and for every 5 to 7 nights someone chooses to spend in Port Macquarie, that same person's only spending 2 nights in Coffs Harbour. So it's hurting. So we're asked, what can we do to change the situation? And I guess the first thing is you need to, through understanding the problem with the community and the elected officials and the technical experts, actually understand the problem and that there is an alternate future. So what we did through the course of 3 workshops there is that we actually said, how do people get around? And surprise, surprise, there's 10,000 residents within a 5-minute walk of the city centre. They've all moved to Coffs largely for a healthy lifestyle. They walk to the beach, they cycle to the beach, they promenade along the river, but no one actually saw walking or cycling as a viable means to get into their town centre. So everyone drives, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the only way to get into the town centre was to drive. So council gutted all of the streets except the main street to add more parking. And today we're faced with the issue that council had no money left for other infrastructure except for future parking garages to the extent of $10 million. And we kind of stepped back to the community and said, is that what you want for your community, and particularly for your children, to simply have more parking garages? Is that your legacy, or what could we do differently? And we worked out through the course of 3 workshops that if the current population could just simply shift how they moved into the town centre by 10%, 10% of those people started to walk or cycle into the city centre, out of $10 million allocated for parking garages, they'd save $5 million and be able to redeploy that $5 million for new cultural infrastructure and public realm improvements. And that was the light bulb moment for an entire community. And then that became the basis of effectively a complete street strategy, which basically reinvented all of these streets that were currently parking garages and just gut it for traffic, and new cycle lanes are being planned, the streets are being narrowed, opportunities for new shops to engage with the streets, all of those sorts of things Steve has been spoken about. There's now a detailed roadmap for how to get there and an implementation strategy. But I guess particularly in that instance, it was through these 3 workshops that when the plan went up to council, and the community found out that a couple of the councillors were going a bit wobbly at the knees and thought they might default back to the old way of doing things, 1,000 people from the local community actually turned up in support of the vision, and the councillors were overwhelmed, have signed off on it, and now that town is moving forward on, I guess, a complete street strategy, which is not only linked to active living but also to cultural infrastructure and other things. The second one is the technical issues that Steve spoke about. They're everywhere, but it's a pseudoscience. And as I think Steve said, you know, you've got dimensions. Cars need this width, trucks need this width of lane, but it's not the reality. And again, through a workshop process, we were engaged by Waverley Council to look at Bondi Junction Town Centre. And I think if you know Bondi Junction Town Centre, it's a contested ground. There's a transit interchange there. There's a major Sydney buses dominate it. There's taxis. There's cars going everywhere. And I think, like Steve said, you look at the traffic model and it's melted down. But I guess here, and this is what was quite inspiring, Waverley Council said, rather than chucking more money into sections for cars, which we can never solve the problem anymore, how can we actually begin to spend money on the modes of transport that we can actually improve, which is particularly walking and cycling? And again, particularly I think some traffic engineers were very sceptical. There's nothing you can do to solve the public realm in Bondi Junction because there's simply no room. But again, through that workshop process, in Bondi Junction, out of the existing public realm, we did some road diets and we managed to find 2.6 kilometres of new bicycle lanes that we could weave through the city centre and connect it into the surrounding neighbourhoods. And we also found about 1 hectare of new people spaces. And 1 hectare, that's about the area of 6 Olympic swimming pools grafted into the existing public realm for people. So that was a major win. But again, there were still the sceptics. So they said, we don't believe it can happen. So we took some pop-ups or some trial mechanisms to demonstrate how short-term action could facilitate the long-term change. So on day one, we removed a couple of car spaces, we restriped some streets with some paint, we built some little parklets, and it basically demonstrated to the skeptics that through these pilot initiatives, the world wouldn't end. Cars could still move through the streets, but at the same time, and I think this is really important, and it goes back to one of the things that Steve was saying, we could begin to interview users of the public realm and the new spaces and begin to actually get the metrics of how people are using the 21st century city. So we interviewed retail shops that were benefiting from the parklets. Surprise, surprise, for 80% of retailers interviewed, they actually reported an increase in retail trade, even though some parking spaces had been removed. Similarly, too, over 400 people, particularly mums with younger children, were saying that the public realm was more friendly and inviting for them. And I guess through building up this body of evidence, there's now a long-term roadmap over the next 10 years to effectively complete all of the streets of Bondi Junction Town Centre. And as part of that process now, Council's been able to get somewhere in the order of $60 million of seed funding framed really around sustainable transport, health, but also the other dimensions Steve spoke about, which is improvement to retail trade through place capital. So I guess they're the two quick examples of how you do have to shift the culture, but you've got to take everyone along for the journey. And then the next step is in beginning to change your standards, how you could perhaps use pilots or other things to take the skeptics along over the short term. So thank you.